Well, thank you very much, Ruth and Elisabeth and all the other hosts who are here tonight. And it hasn't started snowing yet, so maybe this will be a good luck event and it won't start snowing at all. First, let me just say the Women's City Club at 95 looks good. So everybody should go out and sell what your beauty product line is. So raise a little money for the Women's City Club. But 95 years is you know, something to be very proud of. A lot of organizations die in the moments where you decide what color the stationery should be, right? Everything just completely falls apart, so that you have been able to get past that one milestone and keep going for 95 years, but keep going for 95 years in a way where you've continued to have an impact on the dialogue of public policy in the city and state of New York, but also, more importantly, have had an impact on the public policy in the city and the state of New York is a tremendous accomplishment, something your founders would be extraordinarily proud of. I think they, too, would be happy there was a first woman speaker, but annoyed it took until 2006 for that to happen, and would probably be fairly clear and loud about that annoyance, the founders, that is. You know, as we stand here today in 2011, the truth about women in the city of New York, in my opinion, is that we've made great progress, and there is still tremendous progress yet to occur. You know, we, for example, have a program in the city of New York, and the state for that matter, about minority and women-owned business program, MWBE. It sounds great. They're a lovely group of letters that seem to roll off your tongue. I'm not sure they're much more than that, to be honest. You know, we have a program where we say we prioritize New York City businesses and MWBEs, but the truth is, if you look at the program, you get a 5 points extra if you bid to the state of New York if your paper application is submitted on recycled paper. That's more than you get in the bump up than if you are an MWBE company. There's something wrong with that when we're in the 21st century in 2011 and we still haven't found a way to give women-owned company and minority-owned companies the same shot at being in the pool of companies that the city and the state contract with. That is an area I know the Women's City Club is concerned about, an area where we can work together and hopefully get real change to occur. You know, we're working right now at the City Council on a piece of legislation around crisis pregnancy centers. I'll tell you a funny story. We went, joined one member of my staff, Danielle Castaldi-Mica, and I think she went in to talk to our Chief of Staff, Chuck Mara, and said, we're going to pass a bill around crisis pregnancy centers. And he said, great, we're for those. And she said, no, we're against those. He said, I'm confused. And we said, that's the problem. These are centers that present themselves as full-service reproductive rights centers. In fact, they're centers that look exactly like a medical office. And you go in and you sit down with someone. Sit down with someone who may be in a coat or scrub, a white coat or scrubs. They have a clipboard. They give you the clipboard. You fill it out as you've done 1,000 times before in medical offices. You give that person your private medical information. You are not in a medical office. You are not in an office that can give you birth control, a gynecological exam, or an abortion. You're in fact in an institution which has a religious affiliation whose goal is to talk you out of getting an abortion, to talk you into adoption. Now, adoption is a perfectly viable option, and for people whom that is their choice, we should support their choice and help them get their child adoption. That's why if you go to Planned Parenthood, that option is very much there for you. So our piece of legislation, which I think will be the first in the country, will require these crisis pregnancy centers to say what they are. It's kind of a truth in advertising piece of legislation. So up front, you'll know if that's what you want, great. And if it's not, you don't have to go there. And they have these names, crisis pregnancy centers. It sounds like a place you would go if you were in need. So we're working to pass that legislation. We are coming up against, as you can imagine, quite significant opposition. And we might need to call on you. It's
discuss political issues that concern them, where they could establish political networks among like-minded, well-informed, smart women, where they could take collective action to get their points of view across. Men in New York had their city club, and women in other cities were founding city clubs. And so it was time for New York women to found a city club of their own. When in the fall of 1915, the state woman suffrage amendment went down to defeat, they were not discouraged, but pressed on and had a productive first 2 years figuring out how they would operate and what their goals would be. After the suffrage victory of 1917, the club grew from a few hundred founders and charter members to some 3,000. They did so well that they were soon able to buy Preston Butler's former mansion on Park Avenue South and turn it into this beautiful clubhouse. They lost it in the Depression, by the way. Why was the club such a success? Precisely because smart, capable women like Mary Garrett Hay and other suffragists who had given so much of themselves both to win the vote as well as to support various political agendas over many decades, they were still politically marginalized. For the city's talented, well-informed, energetic, and committed women civic activists, the Women's City Club was the only, if not the best, game in town. Who were some of the women who made the club such a vibrant place in those early years? You've seen some of them on the PowerPoint in the other room, but I'll just remind you of a few of them, and these are sort of my personal choices of women that I find particularly interesting. Apart from Mary Garrett Hay, who had been the city's foremost suffrage leader, there was, of course, Frances Perkins, then a consumer advocate, and soon to begin her political career as a member of the State Industrial Commission. So she is one woman who made the transition from being a nonpartisan advocate into government service in a point of office. As I'm sure you all know, she would go on to head the Industrial Commission under Governor Roosevelt and then move into his cabinet when he became president. There's my grandmother, Belle Moskowitz, a social reformer who built a unique relationship to Governor Al Smith in the 1920s. She effectively engineered his nomination for the presidency in 1928, a lost cause. One of my favorites is Narcissa Cox Vanderlip, if only for her name. She was quite beautiful, you can't really tell from this, but a suffragist who, when that fight was done, masterminded the campaign to get the New York State Senate to accept the Shepherd-Towner Maternal and Infant Health Act. And I found out all about that by going into her husband's papers, which are at Columbia, and they were buried down at the bottom. And that's where they are. Frances Kellor was part of this group. She was an early graduate of Cornell Law School, an accomplished social investigator, and one of the few women who urged women to move more boldly into partisan politics. Her partner was Mary Dreyer, she's there on the right, head of the New York City Women's Trade Union League and active in the club on labor issues. And Mary's sister-in-law, Ethel Ayer Dreyer, became president of the club after Mary Garrett Hay, and again was president in the 1930s. Ethel led several campaigns for Mayor LaGuardia, so she's another one of those transitional figures getting involved in partisan politics. Here she is at a Women's City Club event, sitting between Eleanor Roosevelt and Eleanor's formidable mother-in-law, Sarah. Both I would not have wanted to be there. Both Dryers, Mary and Ethel, were club mainstays in the 1930s. And of course, there is Eleanor, and you have this picture on your display back there. I love this picture, who never sought office for herself, but who during the 1920s was an energetic advocate of both partisan and nonpartisan local causes. For her, the Women's City Club was formative in training her for the public life she would lead in the decades afterward. Molly Dewson was a probation officer whom Eleanor Roosevelt recruited to be the club's first civic secretary. She later headed the National Democratic Party's women's division and thus followed that separatist path into party politics. Mary Van Cleek was famed as a social investigator for the Russell Sage Foundation. Dr. Kathryn Beeman Davis became the city's first female commissioner of corrections. Dr. S. Josephine Baker was very involved in the club's early years. She was the public health crusader who tracked down Typhoid Mary. And there was Virginia Gildersleeve, Dean of Barnard College. I've come across
about over the years. I was introduced to Women's City Club in 1979 by then Housing Chairman Elisabeth Kempton. And I met her at a meeting of the Housing Commissioners Council, and she was always watching out for women, among other things, and introduced me to the club because we had a huge challenge of rebuilding the neighborhoods of New York City that were in great distress at that time. I mean, today people don't appreciate what a challenge the city faced, and really was a symbol of the possible demise and loss of urban America. And she introduced me to Women's City Club, and we got enormous support, and I did personally, from the women here, in terms of charting an agenda for rebuilding the neighborhoods, bringing affordable housing, dealing with the mounting problem of homelessness, and beginning to get focused attention on that issue. And so that was my beginning, and really I benefited greatly during the years that I worked in affordable housing and development from your support. And more recently, we've been involved in other issues, congestion pricing, where you all got involved, and I think that's an idea whose time has come and will come again soon. So hopefully we'll be back on those battle lines together. Today, I think I wanted to just reference why I think your role is so important. The Assemblyman left, but basically in the 1970s, New York City had a fiscal crisis, and it threatened our state. It was so serious. Today, it's the other way around. New York State, largely because of the long-term decline of the upstate economy and the failure of state governments to do anything constructive about it, New York State is threatening the collapse of New York City. We face a $4 to $5 billion budget gap, not because we are either profligate or have a suffering economy. It is because we are sending $12 billion more to Albany than we get back in taxes and services. And their solution for the past decade has been to raise taxes from New York and subsidize empty hospitals and empty prisons in upstate New York. So we really have to help think about this as a whole state, get involved, and it's an opportunity for Women's City Club. And when they talk about the problems associated with solving the problems, they talk about the special interests. Well, in all the hearings and the testimony and the activities I go to, almost everybody who's there is a special interest. And I have to say that in all that, Women's City Club, when you show up, it is the public interest Women's City Club is representing. And that's been consistent in all the issues you've undertaken, and nowhere is that more important than today. The one thing I would question about the themes that Elisabeth raised was the first one. I mean, we still got to deal with women's issues, and we certainly need to modernize and make more efficient the city and the state. So those are consistent. But the first one, the transition from nonpartisan to partisan, I think we have to head the other direction. And it is time to lead efforts to a nonpartisan overview where we bring people together and focus on the fact that this is going to take all of us to get New York State, and this country for that matter, to avoid the kind of class warfare that it seems that we're threatened with, the polarization that has been responsible for such a recent tragedy in terms of the situation in Arizona. We have to do something to bring people together. So I would suggest the one thing that we might focus on, but reverse the direction, is to restore a nonpartisan spirit, which I know is true to the Women's City Club as well. So thank you very much for including me tonight. Congratulations on 95.